What's going on, guys? Welcome back to your Lake Fork Guide. Today I'm going to teach you guys all about fishing a big worm and show you the big worm that guarantees you to get more bites throughout the summer that about 80% of anglers don't even know it exists. Well, guys, it has gotten to the hot time of year, man. It's heating up, starting to get warm temperatures. It's a nasty, I'm sweating like crazy right now. It's nasty hot, flat calm day. It's not all bad though. As miserable as that may make a fat guy like me, it does something to the fish. It puts them in more predictable places, puts them in some of these offshore structure areas. And really, one of the simplest baits that you can fish, if you're not used to offshore structure fishing, one of the easiest baits you can pick up and fish and get confidence in offshore structure fishing, because fish will bite it and really big fish will bite it, is going to be big plastic worms. These big plastic worms comes in all shapes and varieties. There's ribbon tails, there's straight tails, there's creature baits, there's, you know how it is, there's endless plastic options. But maybe the most simple might be the most effective throughout summer. That's just going to be an oversized straight tail worm. Looks like an old Zoom trick worm, just a really, really big one. That may be your best option to go fish offshore. And in particular, this worm that I want to show you guys today and feature for you guys today, if you've watched this channel a lot, you'll be very familiar with this worm. But there's a few things that make this worm extremely special. It flat out catches more fish than other worms just like this. You know, Strike King has an oversized straight tail worm, V&M has one, 6th Sense has one. Every company out there that makes plastics pretty much has a really big straight tail worm. This is the SmashTech Magnum Crawler. We also know her as, say with me now, Big Perm. That's old Big Perm right there, like the movie Friday. But this one's a little bit different. I'm gonna tell you why. It has no salt. That doesn't sound like a major thing, and you're like, man, why are all these other bait companies putting salt in their baits? Well, like the 6th Sense one's pretty good. It's really good because it doesn't have as much salt. So the no salt, or the minimal amount of salt, changes the buoyancy of the worm. This worm will actually float. If you took this worm hook and throw it in the lake, it's going to float on top all day long. It'll never sink. But what that does is when that worm is on the bottom and you rig it on a shaky head, the tail is going to stand up. No matter how slow you fish it, even when it's sitting dead still on slack line, the tail is going to stand up and it's going to move around. Even on a day like today where there's hardly any wind current at all, that tail is still going to be wiggling and moving and talking to those big, reluctant, lethargic fish in the summertime. It's going to speak to their soul. And I can tell you from fishing all kinds of straight tail worms, you know, back in the day before all these companies came out with them, I used to throw the Zoom Magnum trick worm a lot. This worm will outfish it. Strike King's worm, this worm will outfish it. The V&M worm, this worm will outfish it. This worm will outfish and get more bites than any of the other big straight tail worms because of the no salt factor. I think there's a misconception out there. People think they put salt in the baits because it makes the fish hold on to them longer. I don't find there to be any truth in that at all. They bite that worm with no salt, hold on to it just fine, and I don't add any scent to it. The salt does make a worm sink, but here's what else salt does. Salt makes plastics fall apart, guys. A lot of bait companies are literally putting salt in their plastics to make them fall apart so that you have to buy more. The one thing that I love about SmashTech Custom Baits is he makes his baits to fish the way he wants them to fish. He wants that worm to be durable. In fact, if you were to look really, really closely on this, and I know this won't show up on camera, but you can actually see teeth marks from this worm where it was catching fish yesterday on a guide trip, and yet here today, it's still in perfect shape. I mean, this worm lasted us all day yesterday. It's common for these worms to catch 8, 10, 12, 15 fish before you have to replace them. That's another advantage of not having salt in that worm. But the main way that I rig this worm is going to be on a big shaky head. Now, when it comes to big shaky heads, the best one on the market, in my opinion, hands down, is the 6th Sense Divine Shaky Head, 5/8 ounce, and it's got a 7/0 hook. Let me show you why I love this shaky head so much. Let me take this worm off real quick. It is the hook. The hook is the reason that I love that shaky head. As you can see, that is a massive hook right there. 7/0 EWG style hook, stand-up shaky head. For as big of a shaky head as it is, it comes through cover and timber really well because it's perfectly round, as you guys can see. So it rolls around and comes through the crevices and the cracks of the rock and shell and timber and all that good stuff. It works through cover very well. But what I really love is that 7/0 hook, because what that allows me to do is that allows me to put it on a really big rod, a really long rod, and I can make a really long cast. And we'll talk about why that's important here in a little while. But I can make a really long cast, and I can pile drive these fish and set the hook on them as hard as I want to with that giant rod because I've got that 7/0 hook. The other thing that it does is at Lake Fork, we've got all this timber around us. Man, it allows me to manhandle those fish in that timber. Even 7, 8, 9, 10 pound fish, I can really pour the heat to them and horse those fish to the boat and keep them out of all these underwater obstructions that we have in Lake Fork. As far as the rest of the gear goes, man, like I said, big rod. I like to throw it. The lightest rod I throw it on is a 7/7 heavy Century series. This one right here is actually the 8-foot heavy Lux series. I've been throwing it a lot on the new American series. They have a 7/4 mag heavy in the American series, custom American made series from 6 Sense Fishing that's phenomenal for this technique, as well as a big jig offshore as well. Really good rod for that. But basically any rod you would throw a big 3/4 ounce jig offshore on, you can throw that same rod on this big shaky head deal. 20 pound fluorocarbon line is always the line I use, and I'm always using a high speed gear ratio reel because I'm not actually moving the bait with my reel handle. We'll get into that more here in a little bit. The other one is a Carolina rig. As you can see here, I've got a big 5/0 EWG hook, and I've got myself a Carolina rig. Now, there's my leader length. Everybody always wants to know what my leader length is. It's about that long right there. I don't really know what that is. 3.5 foot maybe 4 foot. That's usually about what I throw, sometimes a little longer. But one thing that I'm using for my Carolina rig, guys, this is the 6 Sense Carolina pre-rig. I believe this is a 3/4 ounce as well. But these Carolina pre-rigs, man, they are super handy. I absolutely hate having to rig up a Carolina rig from scratch when you're doing it the old school way. But what you do is you get you these pre-rigs, take it out of the box, go ahead and tie your leader and your hook on there and just roll it up in baggies or little empty prescription pill bottles. Keep those ready to go. Man, when you're ready to tie a Carolina rig on, you pull that out, you tie one knot on the front of your pre-rig, put your bait on your hook, and you're fishing a Carolina rig. You can imagine how much time that's gonna save you and how many more casts you're gonna get in by doing it like that. But again, this bait, like we said earlier, with the buoyancy, the no salt, when you rig this up on a Carolina rig, man, it's the same deal, dude. You get so much more action, so much more durability, and this worm from SmashTech Custom Baits, the Magnum Crawler, just gets more bites. I would say take my word for it, but we've shown you over the years, from the time that the launch of this bait was insane, but we've shown you over the years a ton of big fish catches, especially in the hot time of year, primarily in the hot time of year on this channel. My guide customers that have fished it with me, they are well aware of the power of big perm. They've caught 1 million giant fish on it as well. You're seeing some of those clips right now, some of the big fish that we've caught on camera over the past years, and even as recently as our last video right before the Bassmaster Elite series that we did on the water, we were catching some big fish on big perm. Let's talk about colors a little bit, because you know, colors, everybody gets kind of bent out of shape about colors. What's the best color? I kind of have a variance of colors that I use. Traditionally, I'm throwing, you know, a light green, a watermelon seed, watermelon of any kind of flake you want. This is actually a custom pour. It's got a little gold and silver flake in it, but just a watermelon seed worm. Or a darker green, like a green pumpkin. I think he calls this goat melon, but it's like a green pumpkin type color. So I throw like a light green, a dark green, and then I throw a reddish color worm, a purple color worm. You could throw June bug red flake. This is plum apple right here. It works really well. But a new color that I have found this year from SmashTech is called Fake Out. And it's a very interesting color. If you look at that worm in my hand, it looks brown. But then when I hold it up in the sun, that's old Panky right there. Old Panky. Panky, get down there and get to talking to him. She'll catch him now, I'm telling you. The color is called Fake Out. I literally bought it just because it was a different looking color than I had seen. And on Lake Fork, sometimes picking something different works. And ever since I bought it, it's been the primary color we've been getting our bites on the big shaky head with the big worm. Now let's talk about the types of areas you're going to need to locate these fish in throughout the summer. As we continue to get hotter, more and more of these fish are going to stack up offshore. You're really going to be better off if you depend on your electronics to locate these fish for you. But to give you guys a starting point on some of the types of areas that you want to look for, we're talking about main lake points. We're talking about pond dams, road beds, humps, sometimes creek channel bends at times. Bridge corners, as you see in the background, those apron riprap corners can be a big player in the summertime as well. Any type of deep, you know, relatively mid-depth water to a much deeper water transition, wherever that happens quickly and suddenly, the hotter it gets, the more the fish are going to relate to that. Typically early in the summer like we are now, they'll be on more gradual sloping type of structures, main lake points, things like that, that have a slow taper to them. And then as we get hotter and hotter in July and August, I like to refer to it as smaller tops and sharper drops. Things that have a smaller feeding area on top, a hump or a pond dam or an old bridge that's underwater, things like that tend to play more the later in summer we get, where it's a smaller area up top, they don't have to chase the bait as much, and it's got an even steeper angle into the deep, deep water. That way they spend less energy moving up and down in the water column vertically, and they don't have to chase bait as much on top of the structure as they do, say now, they'll actually get out and roam these long points and chase them around a little bit. So that's just kind of the pattern I found on Lake Fork and other lakes in the area over the years. Not a hard set. They can be on a long main lake point in July and August. They can be on a pond dam right now. So it's no absolutes in fishing as always, but that's generally the way the pattern shapes out throughout the summer. Main thing is use your electronics to locate these fish on these structures before you start fishing for them. If you don't have those electronics, go out there and find the high percentage areas like the ones we're showing you on the map, okay, and just fish those areas very slow and very methodically. Now it is time for me to get on the front deck and explain to you guys exactly how I fish this worm to get really big bass to eat this thing. All right, one of the biggest keys when you're fishing this that I've found is when I locate fish on my electronics, it helps me a lot to get more bites. If I set up as far away from these fish as possible while still be able to reach them, you can easily cast a bait like this 100 feet. So if you look at your scale on your electronics, I like to set mine at 50 feet, and I like to try to position the fish at what I estimate to be 70 to 80 feet away from the boat. It's kind of where I want to start on the school. So if I mark the school back here, I would want my boat to be sitting roughly 70 to 80 feet away from those fish. I can cast 100, which is going to put me 20 feet behind the school, and then bring my bait through them. So long cast. And after that, this is one of the simplest baits that you'll ever fish. Right now I'm waiting on that bait to sink all the way to the bottom. And once that happens, I'm simply going to drop my rod tip and reel up my slack, and then drag it up. You can just drag it right on up the ridge like this right here. If you get on these good spots that got the hard stuff, here right now I'm a little off the side of it, but here in a minute I'll hit some hard patches and it'll kind of grab my bait. My bait will just kind of ta-toon, ta-toon, ta-toon. When you feel that rock or that shell or whatever it is that you're fishing down there, you want to be careful with this bait not to go too fast. The power of this bait is that it stands up when the bait is sitting still. Therefore, you don't want to fish the bait too fast. You're taking the strength of the bait away from it. So I really like to fish this bait extremely slow. So when I feel my bait hopping over shell, rock, whatever it may be, I want to feel one at a time. A lot of times when you drag, if you drag like this, you'll feel like right there, I just felt boom, 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 right there when I drug it. You don't want to feel bump, 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 bump. You want to feel bump, 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 bump. Just like that, one at a time, going over those bumps. Fish it very, very, very slowly. You guys can see how slow I'm moving that bait. Now, on a windy day, it's perfectly calm today. On a windy day, a lot of times what you'll have to do, pro tip right here, drop your rod tip, still point your rod, reel up all your slack, and then drag your bait down low and to the side. That keeps some of that wind off of your line, keeps some of that bow out of your line, and helps you feel what you're dragging through and feel a bite much, much better. So when it's windy, remember, drag with the rod tip down by the water out to the side. You can do it this way, or if I was over there, I could do it this way. Drag in either direction. Now, when I get a bite, whether I'm dragging up here or whether I'm dragging down here, when I get a bite, he's gonna hit it. A lot of times they'll knock a little slack in your line. What you wanna do is point the rod right at the fish, reel up all your slack, feel for weight. Once you feel there's weight there and you feel like the fish is on, take a step back and set the rod as hard as you can and as fast as you can to your right shoulder. The big key is to just drive that. It's a big, big hook. You've got to drive that 7/0 hook into them. So you want to bring that rod as sharp and fast as you can, as you see on some of our hook set clips. Bring it all the way to your right shoulder right here, and notice where that rod is pointed. The fish is out there. Where's the rod pointed? Away from the fish. It's going to put a really big bend in the top of my rod when I got a big one on and I'm pointing it away from him like that. That is the key component to landing these fish and not letting them throw your hook, is to always keep that bend in the rod. So as I point that rod, let me give a worm in here so I don't hit anything. But as I point that rod away from me, okay, I got it away from me right here, set the hook, fish starts running this way, I go this way a little bit, I'm still pointing the rod. The fish goes that way, pointing the rod away from me. If I'm pointing this way, the fish starts going this way, I'm going to come over my head and point the rod this way. Fish is now here. The rod is always pointing away from the fish. That's going to keep that really hard bend in that rod, and that's going to make those fish stay hooked. Because see, when you got that bend in the rod and they shake their head, they can't go anywhere. But if that rod's only bent a little bit and they shake their head, you see that slack in the line? That's how they get off, guys. Make sure you keep a big bend in that rod at all times. Other than that, man, you kind of reel them to the boat. You can boat flip most of them if you know what you're doing. If you don't, go ahead and lip them or get a net. Man, I really prefer, even with 8-9 pound fish with that big hook and big rod, to just winch them to the boat, keep the rod pointed away. Once they get coming towards the boat, get their momentum going and just ease them over the gunnel and drop them in. That's my preferred way to land fish on big hook baits like the Big Shake 'em Head. Hey man, thank you guys so much for watching. Go out and find SmashTechBaits.com, or you can find them on Tackle Warehouse, or you can buy them at Lake Fork Marina and many of the tackle stores around Lake Fork. It's a phenomenal bait. I guarantee you it gets you more bites than other worms will. And remember, about 80% of the guys out there don't even know about it. You'll have a leg up on the competition. That's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, we appreciate it. If you want to get some shaky heads, Carolina pre-rigs to rig these worms up, go over and see 6thsensefishing.com. Order them there. Be sure you use that code YourLakeForkGuide. You'll save 10% on all orders. Other than that, one more thank you, and we'll see you next time right here on Your Lake Fork Guide.